Well, we're starting another edition of Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell. I'm George Harvey. This is Tom Finnell. And we have a guest this week who is Tom Finnell. I have an energy blog, geoharvey.wordpress.com, and I also write for Green Energy Times. And the result of having the blog is I go through the news pretty thoroughly every day, looking for items on energy and global warming and things of that nature. And I put them on the blog with links to the articles that I find. And the result of that is that I find a lot of information and I'm able to see trends. So we decided to put together this little thing so that this show so people could follow those trends. And so we're going to start out with news that appeared on the 31st of January. And it was on the 31st of January that we heard that investment bank Goldman Sachs was supporting renewable energy projects with an anticipated investment of about $100 billion, about $40 billion between now and 2021. And their expectation is that that is going to produce big profits. Now, also on the same day, we heard that there was a hole 3 centimeters across, which is a little bit more than an inch, believed to be in the suppression chamber of the Fukushima Daiichi No. 2 reactor, and that highly radioactive water is leaking out. Fukushima Daiichi Reactor 2 is the one that the building did not explode. Number 1, the building exploded. The explosion went outward. The smoke was white, and the reactor melted down. Number 2, the reactor melted down, but the building didn't explode. The number 3 building exploded with a vertical column, very forceful, of black smoke. And the number 4 building, and it melted down. And the number 4 building exploded, like the number 1, with a sideways blast of white smoke. But the reactor did not melt down. This is number 2. And it's not good news, but I think that it's not surprising that there was a hole in the suppression chamber, which is under the reactor and takes excess pressure. That's what it's for. The third item here, and this is important for Vermont and a lot of people in Vermont, the House voted overwhelmingly on the day before, January 30th, to, I guess 29th, to expand greatly the net metering program in Vermont. And in fact, this is a 4-fold expansion. And the current law said that the utilities had to take up to 4% of their peak capacity from renewable power and so forth that was put on the grid by other parties, and that they had to pay for that. And they had to pay a fairly healthy rate for it. That cap was met in some of the northern areas. Actually, I don't know that it's all northern.
Some of the really smaller utilities, municipals and some of the co-ops.
Green Mountain Power had not met that.
Correct.
But the cap has now is being expanded. This has not become law yet because I guess the Senate hasn't voted on it yet. But they're going to 15% according to the House bill, and I have no doubt that Governor Shumlin is going to support that goal.
Well, generally, he's quite in favor of renewables.
Yeah, very much. Now we have an item here that comes from Iceland.
Aha.
And Tom and I are playing with a new toy here. So Tom is going to try to put up a picture of what's going on in Iceland. The world's first, this is February 1st, the world's first geothermal energy system that was magma-based has been built in Iceland, taking advantage of the Earth's heat to generate electricity. Well, these geothermal energy systems, as opposed to geothermal heating for houses, which is a different thing, the geothermal energy systems use the Earth's heat. And of course, Iceland has got more than it needs. And they drilled down, and they actually went into molten rock. So they're taking steam from molten rock.
So they got a good heat source going there.
They got a good heat source. I hope they don't, freeze the molten rock and block things up and then cause trouble, but I guess that's not likely.
We're up on the screen now.
Oh, you're up on the screen.
Yep.
By golly. So people, this is a geothermal system in Iceland. And Iceland is one of those areas that has a lot of geysers.
Geysers, too.
Geysers? Yeah, this photo came from Wikimedia Commons. All of the photos that we're going to be showing today, except for the ones that Tom has of ships, came from Wikimedia Commons, which is commons.wikimedia.org. And this particular photograph was supplied by Hansuli Krapf, I'm guessing, as the pronunciation of that. I don't know Icelandic, so I might be wrong. But whenever I see these geysers, I'm reminded of a story that I heard about the Valley of the Thousand Smokes in Alaska, and some missionary having a place in this valley which had geysers all through it. And the geysers actually affected the microclimate of the valley.
I would expect that,
And as I recall, he was growing bananas. Crazy. Okay, moving on. Shell's incoming CEO announced that a court ruling has placed significant obstacles in the way of oil exploitation in Alaska. The company announced it will cut capital spending by about $10 billion this year and sell many of its assets. And incidentally, among the assets it has been selling are its assets relating to fracking. So Shell it looks like they may be, they're scaling down their energy stuff.
Well, they seem to have pulled out of the Arctic entirely.
I think so. And the hope that the environmentalists in that area have is that nobody else is going to go in there. The problem is that the estimates of potential damage that were produced by, I guess it was the EPA or the DOE, forget which, in Washington, years ago when they started working on this, were very, very badly off. And so they were producing far more damage than was anticipated. So they have pulled out of that. Next, also in the first, we heard that the U.S. wind power industry didn't put a whole lot of generating capacity in 2013. In fact, they had over 90% drop in new installations in 2013 compared to 2012. However, they have 10.9 gigawatts on order for the first quarter of 2014.
I bet this has something to do with subsidies somewhere.
It's got to, someplace, yeah. Yeah, it absolutely has to. I think that what they may have been doing was, since the old subsidies depended upon not actual finished installations, but significant start before the end of 2013. I think they were probably putting a lot of attention on starting things and not very much attention on finishing them. But the 10.9 gigawatts that they've got on order is more than and that's just for the first quarter, is more than they have installed in any year to date. So this is going to be a record year. It's going to be a record year. And 10.9 gigawatts is approximately equal to about 5 new nuclear power plants. I'm using the capacity factor when I say that for wind. It's a little bit higher than is usually given, but part of the reason for that is because we've seen some stuff, and in fact there's a report later on here. We've seen stuff in the news indicating that you can get a lot more out of wind than had been got in the past, merely by changing the software that's used to drive to control the wind turbines. You can actually increase it by 10%.
Yeah, didn't GE just introduce a program doing exactly this?
Exactly.
And they're going back and retrofitting stuff.
They're going back and retrofitting.
All of a sudden, you get 10% more power.
You get 10% more power. And there are wind turbines in Texas and elsewhere that have capacity factors upwards of 50%, which is more than half of the production of a nuclear power plant rated at the same capacity. So we're starting to see wind getting much more, producing much more power out of a given installation. And of course, the software is a tiny expense compared to a wind turbine. Those big wind turbines, I have no idea how much they cost.
I don't either, but they're getting
they're getting big, 8 megawatts. Okay, going to the second. The 2nd of February, Bloomberg New Energy Finance has revealed that China, quote, outstripped even the most optimistic forecasts, end quote, to install a record 12 gigawatts of photovoltaic projects in 2013. In fact, a boom at the end of the year could push the result up to 14 gigawatts, and they're projecting 14 gigawatts for 2014. So this is just, the Chinese are just going gangbusters on, on solar power.
You haven't seen this one. I'm trying to pull it up here. You got to forgive me here.
That's quite
This
all
is
right.
new for me.
Have
I'm not
fun.
asking you to forgive me. I'm asking these guys.
Oh yeah, everybody forgive Tom. If I can do it, you can do it.
let me see if I can't get this guy up here. I'm working with 2 mice at the same time. So
Oh yeah.
there we go.
Oh, here we go.
This is 11.5 gigawatts.
11.5 gigawatts.
Megawatts.
Megawatts.
Sorry about that.
Megawatts. Is that actually up on the screen now?
It's up on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll try to get it a little bit bigger.
We're very confused. So I'm going to ask you to forgive me as well. Oh, goodness. Forgive me as well. That's pretty impressive.
This is in California.
It's in
today.
California.
This is a real-time picture.
All right. It's a real-time
Well, not
picture.
real-time.
It was
sometime
a
in the
real-time.
last year.
Oh, sometime in the last year. Okay. This is photovoltaic. And of course, there's also concentrating solar. And we're going to see another
Let's see a picture on that. Yeah, I got
of
a
that
picture of that
later on, yeah. Cruising on. A new, relatively low temperature means of creating liquid fuels from common plastic waste. And what they're talking about here is plastic bags, the stuff that you buy food in and you don't recycle it because it doesn't have a number on it. They're talking about gathering common plastic waste and turning it into liquid fuel that you could run a car on.
Well, this is something whose time has come. I mean,
think so.
There's no shortage of plastic bags.
Yeah. That was developed by researchers at Centurion University of Technology and Management and the National Institute of Technology, both of which are in India. We got that from Clean Technica. I should mention the names of all these places. Okay. And we have another photograph coming up. This is the one about the utilities guy. You know the one I mean? The photograph?
Oh, yeah.
So why don't I read this while you're getting that one ready?
Well, I'm getting that one. I'll pull
This
it.
is a Jim Rogers, who is a recently retired head of Duke Energy, did an interview, and in the interview, from the interview came a Renew Economy had an opinion piece called "Why Traditional Utilities Are Like Frogs Swimming in Warming Water." And
You like this guy.
yeah, like that guy. He says that regulations and business models will not change quickly enough to save traditional utilities in the face of solar. And one of the things that I thought was really funny about this is that he said if he were going into the energy business today, and bear in mind that he just retired from being the head of Duke Energy, which is the biggest utility in the country, he said he would go into rooftop solar because he thinks that's where the future is. And it made me think maybe he's like a frog swimming in warming water, because that's not big business. I mean, there's going to be big business involved in manufacturing the equipment, but there's going to be a bunch of big businesses, and they're going to be competing, unlike utilities, which tended to have a monopoly on an area.
Yeah.
And there are going to be installers who are national or international, but they're probably going to be as much up against local organizations as McDonald's is up against the various restaurants in whatever community that they're in.
Well, that sort of makes sense. I mean, one thing I should clear up a little bit, they are monopolies.
Which?
But they're sort of
The utilities, yeah.
today. But they're sort of benevolent monopolies that were allowed because it was practical.
Oh, yeah.
Or it was impractical to have more than one power company
Yeah.
serving the same area. So the state agreed to give them a monopoly, but they in turn agreed to let the state regulate them.
So they
which
were
they do regulate pretty heavily.
Yeah.
They're not going to arbitrarily increase the rates.
Yes.
They have to go through a public service board or something like
Right.
that. And sometimes these public service boards are actually representing citizens.
Sometimes. Hopefully, yeah. Okay. Well, we're off our frog. We can go back to real human beings instead of dealing with the way monopolies look. This on the 3rd of February. And by the way, all this news is like a day late because I'm looking at the news early in the morning, but I'm getting the previous day's news.
By the way, if anybody here isn't familiar with the analogy of the frog, or
yeah.
why we're even talking about a frog there,
Yeah.
the analogy goes like this. If you take a frog and dump him in a pot of hot water, he's going to jump right out. But if you put him in a cool water and gradually raise the temperature, he's not even going to know until eventually he boils. And the analogy generally is we guys are the frogs.
We're not noticing the change.
And they're giving us this stuff very slowly so we don't see it.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, we've been boiled.
And you know, really, when you think about growth in the solar industry, the growth rates, the solar industry in the United States, and rooftop solar, I don't know how much it grew, but the solar industry in general, in a period of about 7 years, grew about 700%. Mm-hmm. And this is a phenomenal growth rate. And I've actually heard people in the utilities say, well, there's no point in even paying attention to solar because it's only 0.5% of the market. And what they don't realize is that they're quoting a figure that's 2 years old. And with the growth rate that solar has, it's probably already 1.5%. But it's growing so fast that if you project its rate of growth, you know, this is a serious problem because if it could maintain its rate of growth, it would take over the entire industry within about 8 or 9 years.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I haven't done the math, but
Yeah.
it's far more staggering than you might think. Oh, it's only 2% now. You know.
And unfortunately for them, some of them are relying on the Energy Information Administration for their projections. And the Energy Information Administration's projections are not projections. They're baseline data that you're supposed to be able to compare things to. And they show no growth at all for solar until after 2035. It's a very strange thing. So they really are basing their information on bad data that is unanalyzed.
Are they incompetent or just crooked?
No, I just think they literally are like frogs in warming water. They just don't notice.
Don't know what's going on.
And what's going to happen probably is that they're going to turn someday and look and see that their profits have not just dwindled away, but are turning rapidly more negative every year.
Yeah.
And at some point, you know, the ones that are dependent upon fossil fuel are going to have to hit the fact that we're putting $535 billion to $1.9 trillion into subsidies for fossil fuels every year. The UN is saying, stop that, stop it. And of course, little countries all over the world are going to say, why are we doing that? You know.
Well, I find it very hypocritical that the fuel companies who've been getting subsidies for 100 years are getting so upset about solar and wind getting subsidies. But that's business.
Yeah.
That's the way it works.
And the utilities that are dependent upon those industries are going to have to deal with the fact that the prices are going up because the subsidies have disappeared. So and of course the World Bank is no longer funding subsidize funding coal or I know coal. I'm just wondering if they're I don't know if they're funding nuclear or not, but they're not funding coal plants, and I don't know that they're funding natural gas. Anyway, okay. On the 3rd of February, we got this note. A study from UC Boulder Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research says the global warming we are seeing is outside of any known natural variability and has to be due to increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. You know, we're just seeing more and more of this thing. Global warming is real. You know.
It's real.
I have a friend, I think maybe I've mentioned this before. I have a friend who says global warming is not real. It's a socialist plot. They're trying to take over the world, and they're trying to get us all to behave as though it is real so they can take over the energy. And I'm sitting there saying, rooftop solar? I don't think so. Okay, moving on.
I'm glad it's not a communist plot, though.
You know, it's really interesting to me. You have two models of business here that are in competition with one another. All right, one of them is socialism, so-called phony socialism, in which the government takes possession of the means of production and is controlled by a very small number of people, eventually for their own benefit. Opposing that is another system in which you have a so-called free market, in which people take over the market, become monopolies, and start to control the government. So in one case, you've got the government owning the means of production for the benefit of a small number of people, and in the other one, you have the owners of the means of production controlling the government for the benefit of a small number of people. So what is the difference between runaway communism and runaway free market?
I don't think there's any difference at all.
Not a bean's worth. That's my opinion, folks. Okay. All right. Now do you have a picture of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant?
No, I don't.
You don't?
I don't. I got a different power plant that everybody all knows and loves, though.
What's that?
I'll pull it right up.
I should say, by the way, the frog was supplied to us by Orest, again through Wikimedia Commons.
We all know and love this place.
Okay, what's that? Oh, that's Vermont Yankee.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
It'll have to do. It's the only picture I've got.
Okay. No, this wasn't a picture of a power plant. It was a picture of a wind farm in Japan.
I got that one.
Well, let's take a look at the wind farm in Japan.
It's
We're having so much fun with this.
first time I've done this, so it's
Yeah, and by the way, I don't know what I'm talking about, so, you know.
wind farm in Japan. Where is it?
Is it the one that your cursor was just on? Is it that one there?
I had it in here, and I don't see it anymore.
Well, it's a farm.
Here it is. Nunobiki Wind Farm.
Ah, there you go. This is a wind farm in Japan. Isn't it lovely? It's right next to a farm in Japan. This is in Fukushima Prefecture. And Fukushima Prefecture, which was devastated by the natural disaster in 2011. Give me a break. Natural disaster. 3 meltdowns is a natural disaster. Has said it will aim to be 100% dependent on renewable energy by 2040. And the region already has an offshore wind farm, in addition to this one, which is in Fukushima, and which was developed following the disaster. That 2011 nuclear disaster, I read natural disaster. I saw nuclear and it came up in my mind, natural. Yeah, that's a serious problem. This picture came from Yonezawa Yamagata. Now, don't you wish you had a name like that?
In English, that would be Smith.
I don't know. Yama, I think, means white, but that's as much of it as I know. Okay. The 4th of February brought us this news. Faced with a plunge in profits, Germany's power utilities are having to bend to the will of the government and join the renewable energy revolution while smartening up on the retail front with new customer-friendly annual savings products. We're seeing a complete change, I think, in the utilities. The utilities in Denmark have actually gone to a point where they're saying that they have a business model that involves retraction rather than growth. They're
shrinking.
They're shrinking rather than growing.
It does almost, well, it probably makes a lot of sense, but to me, from the way I've always been taught, you got to grow all the time.
Well, you know, there's somebody, years ago, I read a thing that somebody said that said, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell. And I think that's true. You can't constantly grow.
Well, in physics you can't. In a closed
in physical
system,
reality you can't.
Yeah, if it's a closed system, you eventually run out of resources.
You can grow in arrogance until you die. Okay. All right. Now, this is an interesting thing that came on the 5th. And this was in the Barry Montpelier Times Argus, saying Entergy Corporation is under, quote, no legal obligation, end quote, to shut down the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has asked Entergy for additional information before granting its request to be exempted from the costly studies and safety improvements. Now, what's happened here is that Entergy has said, we're going to close the plant. And they've entered into negotiations with the state of Vermont dependent on the idea that they're going to close the plant. And of course, the state of Vermont is not stupid enough to think that the fact that they say the plant is closing means that it's actually closing. I mean...
Oh, ye of little faith.
Ye of little faith. I mean, what have we ever heard anything from Entergy Corporation that turned out to be true?
July 17th, 2003.
Right.
And I forgot what it was.
Yeah. These are the people who said there are no underground pipes. They had 7 or 8 different people swear there were no underground pipes, and that was their position until the pipes started to leak, and they had to report the result. But what's happening clearly is that the power plant, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is being asked to excuse Entergy from doing a bunch of things at the power plant that they would normally have to do if the plant were to stay open. And their response is, you don't have any legal obligation to shut this down. Give us, and I think what they're saying is, tell us legally, you are going to shut the plant down. Notify us before we grant you the right not to make these safety improvements.
I would assume that's already been done. Obviously, it hasn't.
I would guess not.
So they're hedging their bets.
Well, I don't think they're purposely hedging their bets. I think they intend it.
I think they do intend to close it.
Yeah. But you know, we're just giving you the news.
Which brings up something also that's interesting. We closed 5 plants in the United States within the last year, or including Yankee.
Including Yankee, yeah.
But on the boards for the next year is another 6.
Really?
That's something I just caught yesterday. It was like a tail end of something that I read.
Wow. I know that Mark, what is his name? He's a professor at the Vermont Law School. Made a projection that there were 17, I think it was 17 nuclear power plants in the United States that are in trouble. Mm-hmm. And
you mean financial difficulty?
well, they're
or technical difficulty.
Financial and technical kind of combined. Yeah. And Pilgrim is one.
Indian Point.
Indian Point is one. Oyster Creek, they're already scheduled to close down in 2017, I think. But there are a bunch of power plants that are moving toward the end of their lives, and the chance that they're going to be able to keep those plants open is not all that good in many cases. So here's another thing that's of interest to people in Vermont. Burlington Electric has settled with the current owners of the Winooski 1 Dam for a purchase price of $16 million. This will allow Burlington Electric to provide a 100% renewable power supply and greater energy security, because they're planning on building this thing they're adapting it apparently so that if the grid goes down, they can separate from the grid and continue giving power from that.
I read an article on that, and that seems to be what's going on. They're going to have a microgrid of their own. That's part of a bigger grid, but if something happens, they flip a switch, and they're still in business.
Do you happen to know how many people Burlington Electric provides power for?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I would have thought that area would be mostly Green Mountain Power. Green Mountain Power provides power to most of the people in Vermont. But Burlington is a big city compared to the rest of Vermont.
Well, yeah.
And I don't think, I don't know how many people are involved in Burlington Electric. It might be just a few neighborhoods.
And I'm not sure that Burlington Electric serves anything other than the geographical town or city of Burlington.
Yeah. Okay.
And a lot of the population up there, probably more so than the city itself, is not within the city limits.
Yep. Well, we're going to take a look at the Ivanpah solar power plant.
Ah, yeah, I got that guy.
Yeah, that's a cool one. Ivanpah solar power plant is the world's largest solar thermal electric plant. Has begun operating its 3 generating units, which will deliver enough clean energy to power more than 140,000 homes in California.
This is amazing. Looking at this picture, what looks like snow in the bottom, that's mirrors.
That's mirrors.
And they're shining up on this shaft that's sticking up
which
there,
is glowing.
which is glowing hot.
And what they're doing there, of course, is they're heating up. I think they're heating salt at this plant to a point where it's molten. Or I think the salt is always molten, but they're pumping it through a system and heating it up to a very high temperature and then storing it as hot salt. And they can use that salt to generate power. And this is big business, clearly. I mean, this is this is a big thing. And that salt stores power. This is not rooftop solar. It's not photo PVs.
I can't really pinpoint the size of this thing. I mean, looking at the screen there, see if I got, there's a couple of things here I think might be people. I don't know, it might be antelope. I don't know,
it's hard to know, but that thing is big. And the molten salt, because it's hot and they're getting power from the salt, will continue to provide power long enough till the sun goes down. So we're talking about a solar power plant that's probably going to be operating, providing power maybe 16 hours a day.
Maybe all day, maybe 24.
You could do it theoretically 24, sure. And that photo, also from Wikimedia Commons, came from Ionides. Anyway. Pretty clearly a Greek name, but I don't pronounce modern Greek either. I think if you spelled that in ancient Greek, I'd probably be able to pronounce it better. Now, next one. This on the 6th. Is today the 6th? By golly, I think it is.
That's what I watched.
So this morning I picked, This morning I picked something up from the internet saying that the European Parliament had called for had voted 341 to 263 to call for binding targets for 2030. This is, they first of all, they didn't want to have targets for 2030. Then they voted, the committee or whatever it was, said, well, we want to have targets that are not as powerful as what everybody wants, or what some people want. So they suggested non-binding targets, and they said they wanted to have a 40% cut in greenhouse gases, but they were willing, or a 35% cut, I think it was, but they were willing to do 27% of their energy from renewable sources. So a lot of people were disappointed And now we've got the whole Parliament voting, and it says, no, these are going to be binding. This is going to be a 40% cut in greenhouse gases from the 1990 levels. This is going to be a 30% energy comes from renewable sources and a 40% improvement in energy efficiency. So the Parliament did not go with what was suggested to them. It went basically with what the Greens wanted.
What the people want.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that's encouraging.
I think it is, yes. Victory for the Arctic Ocean. No drilling next summer or maybe ever was one of the things that came in from Energy Collective. The wild Arctic Ocean just got a blast of good news. This is obviously very even-handed reporting. Shell Oil bound to the inevitable and announced it will not be drilling off the oil off the coast of Alaska this summer. Didn't we see that before? I had that before.
We mentioned it early on in the beginning.
Yeah. I
brought it up, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go on from there. Now, here's a name of a town in Texas. I don't know how to pronounce it. A-Z-L-E.
A-Z-L-E?
A-Z-L-E. Asley?
Got me.
Yeah.
I don't have a picture of this guy.
Okay. Asley, Texas, or Azle, Texas, or however it's pronounced.
What would you say there? This is a family show.
Yes, right. I'm not sure what that means, but has suffered a swarm of earthquakes, more than 30 of them. It has cracked the foundations of houses, frightened local people, created sinkholes, and raised concerns about property values. And who is to blame? Fracking. At least that's what they say. And there are scientists who are supporting that, including people from the U.S. government. EDP Renewables will use GE's wind power-up software, and we talked about this before, to increase the power output of 402 GE 1.5 megawatt wind turbines located at 5 U.S. farms. Now, these are 402 wind turbines of 1.5 megawatts, which are big turbines, but they're not gigantic.
They're commercially available up to 6 already, and they're working on 8.
8, yeah. The result is expected to be an additional 420,000 megawatt hours each year.
It's kind of like free energy, isn't it?
Yeah, and basically what we're talking about here is probably about $25 million worth of power that just comes like that.
That's nice.
Isn't it? This is because they're buying software. My bet is that GE's charging a lot of money for that software.
Well, my bet is they can get away with it.
I think they can. This is enough, basically, the increase, what you get out of the software is an increase in wind power sufficient to provide for 33,000 homes out of 402 turbines. And finally, and I have a reason for putting this in, and we're going to have to discuss this a little bit. Smithfield Foods' commitment to renewable energy is starting to show tangible results, according to the company. Anaerobic digesters in Missouri and Utah will soon deliver electricity to neighboring communities. And the reason I put that in is this. As I go through the news every day, I see over and over and over and over small things that I could talk about. What's a 10 kilowatt array? If somebody puts up a 10 kilowatt solar array in North Dakota, why is that newsworthy? But thousands of people are doing this. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people. In fact, I just yesterday finished writing an article for Green Energy Times, which will be out on the 15th, hopefully, about a house in Devens, Massachusetts, which won the DOE's Challenge Home something award. And that house, it has what's called a HERS rating, Home Energy, don't remember, rating, which is a rating that comes from the DOE of -21. Now, that rating is 100 if a home that's built is built exactly to code. The energy that it uses is just code. Mm-hmm. It's 0 if the home uses no energy at all.
So this means it's producing energy.
It's producing more energy than it's using.
Yeah.
And the guy in Massachusetts is getting checks after, and this is a combined utility check apparently. He has a small amount of propane that's being used for cooking, and there's the electric power that he gets from the PVs. My computer is starting to fail, I think. He gets electric power from the PVs, and the combined gives him he gets a statement, and in the statement is a check for $58. So, and he figured out that the amount of power that the amount of electricity that he was producing, the amount of power that he was using was sufficiently less than the amount that he was producing, that if he bought an electric vehicle, he would be able to power that vehicle and drive 30,000 miles a year on his excess.
Hey, but this kind of stuff is happening.
It's happening. And it's going to happen more and more.
It's just because of technology.
Yeah.
I mean, people favor a lot of this stuff, but the politicians don't pay much attention to the people. But you follow the money.
Yeah.
And the money's there.
Honestly, I think Vermont politicians tend to pay attention to the people.
Well, much more so than in other parts.
But I've heard that if you live in Vermont and you want to meet everybody who's been elected to state office, you can do it in a year.
Probably.
That's what I've been told.
Probably.
Now, you can't do that in New Hampshire, but probably because the New Hampshire House of Representatives.
They got a lot of them.
Oh man, do they ever have a lot of them. I lived in a town that had a population of 3,000 and it returned 2 representatives to the State House. But getting back to this thing, Smithfield's Foods, we're seeing lots and lots and lots of small things being put on the grid. And these are small solar arrays, some of them as small as 1 kilowatt, being grid tied. And we see a lot of very small facilities that are being put up by farms, that are being put up, a lot of farms.
Farmers are doing it.
A lot of farms.
It's quite evident driving along, say, Route 5.
Well, they have a thing going in the UK now where the farmers are starting to get to the point where they realize energy is a crop.
Sure.
They can harvest this.
Yeah.
And the banks are going to the farmers and saying, if you install solar or you install wind, and some of the farmers have pieces of property big enough that they can install wind, if you install these things, it's going to mean that you're going to be more resilient. If your other crops fail, you're going to have a crop here that you're just going to be able to sell. And so they sell, hay, dairy, and eggs, and wind, or whatever. But it's working, and the banks are willing to loan money to farmers, and something like 40% of the farmers in the UK either have or have plans to have renewable power on their farms, which would be grid-tied renewable power. Now, I think we could take a look at some of your other pictures.
I think we can.
Yeah. Now tell me when you've got one up so I can get off screen here and plug my computer back in.
Well, one of the things that you pulled up last week,
yeah,
I think had an article about innovations in solar.
Yeah.
And one of those things happened to have been a solar-powered ship.
A solar-powered ship, yeah.
Yeah, it happened to be, I've since found out, the largest solar-powered ship in the world. And it's based out of Monaco.
Okay.
And it has just completed a round-the-world trip in 535 days or something like that.
Really?
Using no power at all. It has a diesel engine for docking and stuff like that. but basically it's a totally solar-powered ship, and I'll have a picture of that. But I was trying to find out more about that, and I stumbled upon some
remarkable pictures.
stuff about wind-powered ships.
Yes.
Realizing that
Who would have thought that you could power a ship with the wind?
So let me see if I can't pull some of these guys up. I don't have a name for this one. It's just a classic clipper ship.
Okay. Under sail.
Under sail. This is vicinity. Oh, I know why I wanted to bring this one up. I don't remember the name of the ship. It's irrelevant. It was from about the 1860s.
Okay.
It took 250 men to run that ship.
Wow.
And mostly they were up there furling and unfurling the sails.
Yeah. Or down below decks pumping water out of the thing by hand.
Yeah, here's a more modern ship. Let's see if I can find this guy.
Some of these things that they have been producing, and they've been talking about modern ships that are driven by sail for a long time. But one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the maritime sources of pollution are really impressive.
This is a modern ship. This is a modern sailing ship. All of those sails that you see are computer controlled.
Okay.
Okay, this ship requires a crew of 9.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
It's about as big as the other one. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 masts. Huh?
Throwing everybody out of work. A crew of 9.
Yeah.
Who are undoubtedly on 3 shifts. So, at any given time you've got 3 or 4 people working.
Here's another modern ship. This one is called the Maltese Falcon. This is a real picture of a real ship. This is not an artist's conception.
Okay.
This one is run by, how many you want to guess?
1 1/4.
You're off by a quarter.
Really?
One man runs this ship.
One
It's
man
all
runs
computer
the
controlled. And this is his private yacht. The one we saw before that was like an excursion ship, or
Wow.
You can take windjammer cruises. And
I knew that. Yeah.
But this
you
is
can take all kinds of cruises. I mean, you can go on merchant ships and things like that. The thing that I was saying earlier is that the pollution that comes out of maritime trade is really kind of appalling because it's uncontrolled, because they're off at sea.
yeah.
And there have been a lot of people who've been trying over the years to get the shipping business, maritime shipping business, back to wind because of its benefits. But the problem is that it takes a little longer to get across the ocean when you're driven by the wind. And I don't know how much longer it takes, because merchant ships tend to be very slow.
They're slow. Well, I got some things that'll pop into my head as I see the image. Here's a Popular Mechanics from about late 1920s.
Okay.
And they were showing that this is coming. This is a wind towers drive ship in the foreground, and it looks like the Queen Mary or something like that in the background. And those towers that you see up there are the sails. And it's called the Magnus effect, and I don't quite understand it, but if they rotate slowly, they act as sails, and they'll propel the ship forward. Let me get back into this other guy here. Now this is an artist's conception. This isn't a real ship, but this is these would be computer-controlled sails. And I think what prompted this whole thing was an article from you that was talking about a Japanese firm that was turning out plastic sails.
Okay.
And these are the plastic sails. And while this isn't a real ship, things like this are being built as we speak.
Things like that are being built.
Yep, I don't know if there's anything like that yet working, but there are things like that being built. Now here's another excursion ship or sailing. This is the Club Med 2.
Okay.
I don't know how large the crew is on this, but it's a 5-masted ship. And you can
It's
see...
probably got a crew of 3.
Well, Club Med, you know, a lot of these guys are dual,
Oh, yeah,
dual
yeah,
purpose,
okay.
you know, they got to hang around the cocktail parties. And,
Yes, that's right. So they've got a crew of 6.
but this is, as you can see, is a modern configured ship, but it's got sails.
Yeah.
And it also has a diesel engine. I mean, this
Yeah.
is, you know, the sails, they use whatever they can at the time to
Right.
whatever makes the most sense.
Well, you know, one of the things about the sails is that it's going to produce a very different result than running with an engine in terms of comfort for the passengers. I had a friend who went on a cruise recently, and after the cruise started, he asked if he could move his room because he was getting vibrations from the engine.
From the engine, yeah.
And those vibrations, you know, you can feel them all over the ship.
I've been in the Navy.
Huh? Oh,
I can
yeah.
relate to
Okay.
that.
When you've got sails, it all goes quiet.
Yeah, sure.
And, well, not entirely, but...
This one coming up, this is a real boat. This is real. I call it a boat because it's small. It's a...
looks big to me.
It's a tourist, a tour boat. You know,
Okay.
It tours around, takes you on tours around Sydney Harbor.
Okay.
And it's photovoltaic, obviously, but those things in the background are sails.
The things in the background.
Well, let me try it.
That looks like the Sydney Opera House to me.
It is.
Okay.
Did I say Melbourne? No, it's Sydney.
No, you said the thing in the background is sails.
Oh, these things. See where the cursor is?
No, I don't, honestly. Okay, yeah.
They're
Oh,
attached to
the
this ship.
things that are sticking up from the
Sticking
ship
up, yeah.
are sails.
Well, they're both full of PV panels and sails, and they are computer controlled to maximize whatever it can be maximized.
Oh, my
if it's
God.
wind, they furl in a certain way, and if it's solar, they furl in another way. I think I got some pictures of that.
Amazing.
This is actually operational now.
That's amazing. And this is replacing the duck tours they have in Boston Harbor.
Well, it might be. Yeah.
Have you ever been on one of those or seen those ducks driving around?
No, I haven't.
They're amphibious craft
I
left
drove
over.
one in the Navy.
Did you? Okay. They're amphibious craft left over from the Second World War, although I don't think you're left over from the Second World War. So they must have been used more recently than that.
I'll try and pull this one up. It's in Word. Come on, there it is. Okay, this is the one we just saw, and you can see those wings are a little bit different.
Yes.
And this one is a different ship. This is actually a working ferry.
Okay.
And what it said, one of the things that it said about it was that when it's operating as a ferry, both the electrical engine and the diesel engine are operating. So it's not running completely on photovoltaic because it isn't fast enough.
Okay.
For ferry service, they want a certain miles per hour.
Yes.
But they're saving 50% of their fuel.
Okay.
It's made by the same people that made this one.
Okay.
This was a project of the Australian government. Now, I don't know who's running it now, but...
Well, the Australian government that's in power now is trying to get rid of anything that has anything to do with renewables. So they probably, are selling it to a tourist agency or something.
Selling it or leasing it, private.
They're probably
public
still running
partnership.
it, but the current government of Australia since last September is
I've been
very
following that.
anti-renewable.
I'll read what it says about this because it is kind of interesting. A single device able to harness solar or wind energy or both in a seaworthy manner, attached in such a way as to be able to angle to the sun and or the wind, to harness solar power and sail, folding away when not in use. Can be used in singly or in multiples. This one's got what's probably 4 of these things. It only looks like 2. And the other one had 8.
Well, it's interesting there. You can see that they're in use as sails there.
Very likely, yeah.
Yeah. So
It's controlled by software. It operates the sail automatically.
Yeah.
It tracks the sun for optimum solar and the wind for optimum sail.
I am absolutely amazed by this stuff.
Solar sailing, they call it. This is the company.
Yeah.
A revolutionary new way of quiet, free motor sailing, and an exciting breakthrough for sailors. Now this is the advertising. When both sun and wind are present together, the sail has the ability to motor sail or solar sail. That is, harness a positive feedback loop between true wind and relative wind, and increase just using the solar power.
You're getting
There's
there.
a picture of it here somewhere, and I can't quite follow it.
Okay.
This is a prototype when they were working on it, trying to figure. This is basically just sails on a barge, and this is some pictures of it. The one on the left we're looking at now. That's very close to the one we saw.
Yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
that's running as sails.
Yeah.
The one on the right here, it shows you that they can move the sail up and down depending upon what's optimum.
Yes.
And here's down here in this corner is a picture of a pure, wind and solar position, or if they just want solar only, they fold it down if it's like too windy or something.
So they can use this thing as a sail and get electric power from it as a solar PV thing at the same time.
At the same time.
Okay.
And it angles it in such a way that it's maximizing what it's getting.
Yeah.
And this picture over here, I don't quite understand, but it's showing how it works. If you're familiar with the way wind works on ships, you might understand that better than I do.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see if I can get back in here.
Fascinating. Well, I'll tell you, we're coming up hard on the end of our hour. And I will thank our guest for coming and bringing us.
That's me.
That's you.
I got a couple more pictures we can show after the hour's over for the.
Well, let's just show them.
Let's go
and
through
for
them
those
quickly.
people who have been watching on broadcast, thank you for coming. We will continue this for a few minutes on cable, not cable, on internet versions, if they decide to do that downstairs.
This is the Solar Innovations page that first clued me into this, and there's the ship that we just saw.
Okay.
One of the shots it's in New York Harbor.
Where is the Solar Innovations page? It's on the internet. Do you have a web address for that?
I don't have. What we're seeing here is a composite, but
Okay.
it came from a page called Solar Innovations.
Solar Innovations. So a person
Try
can
and Google that.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it'll come up.
Yep.
It mentions, and you mentioned this one too, solar windows.
Yes.
I mean, we mentioned that they had a way of depositing solar on glass. You can
Yep.
still see through the glass and generate solar out of it.
Yes.
It blows the mind. It's spray-on solar power coating system. It involves carefully applying layers of extremely small transparent cells onto glass. And then we got another one here, solar clothing, a solar-powered bikini.
Okay.
For recharging your cell phone in the sun.
Okay.
And here's a little solar-powered phone. The back of it's got solar panels. So we'll move
I don't
along.
think I'd look good in a bikini.
Well, I hate to disagree with you.
All right.
Okay.
To each his own.
This one is,
Oh my goodness, look at that.
yeah, this is just an artist rendition, but obviously that's a tanker. And it's got a whole bunch of these sails on it. And this one isn't a real picture, but they're thinking about building it. They're trying to get somebody to fund the building or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll show you again the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
And I won't talk much about that guy. I'll show you. I got a couple of pictures of the Falcon. This is it from the side. That's really a neat vessel.
It's really.
And this is one guy's toy.
Yeah. And that's controlled by one person.
One man, yeah.
What if he wants to go to bed? Does he just leave the computer on and let it go?
Beats me. I didn't get into it that deeply.
No, I mean, in the old days, they used to do that. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, they'd say,
just go,
okay,
yeah.
I'm going to tie the tiller down.
Tie
and,
the tiller down.
you know, keep going.
This is the ship without its sails.
That's the Maltese Falcon.
That's the
without
same
sails.
ship, yeah.
Okay.
That's what it looks like. And all of those sails, obviously, are computer controlled, and they unroll by themselves. And it's modern times. The modern times are here.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what the world is going to be like in 50 years.
Yeah, well, here's a...
Because we're going through this set of innovations, and you know...
Now, here's another innovation, another variation of this thing. That's a real ship being pulled by a kite.
Oh, my gosh. That's a big kite.
Now, I don't think this is a commercial application, but it is a real ship. That's a real photograph.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a real kite. Yeah.
Wonder how they get the kite up there.
Good question. They run with it.
Yeah, maybe.
This is another artist concept. And if I remember this one correctly, all of those sails retract into the deck when they're not using them.
Wow.
And then they telescope like a car antenna.
Wow.
Now let's see. I'll pull another one. I think I got some stuff. Yeah, this is more on that solar sailor. I'm not going to go through all of the.
You know, the Sydney Opera House does look like a bunch of sails.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. Here's another. This is a composite. It's a real ship, but the sails aren't real.
Okay.
But they're working on it.
So it's an artist's rendering on an actual photograph.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Now here's the tour boat up close.
Okay.
That's pretty neat.
Yep.
And this is something they're working on. They're going to have, it looks like propellers. It looks like it's going to blow around. But this is just an artist's concept. But the point is that there are people working on these advanced ideas, and some of them will make sense economically. We'll see them.
Well, you know, the sailing ships that they had crossing the ocean in the old days stopped making sense economically when people started thinking that it was necessary to cross the ocean within a certain period of time.
But the airplane ruined that one.
Well, I mean, the steamships were able to cross in a very predictable amount of time.
Well, it was predictable, yeah.
Yeah.
It was faster.
And it was faster. And
Here's another aspect, somebody working on something. That's a picture of what can happen to a loaded cargo ship. I don't know what caused all those things to fall over, but one of the benefits of this new technology that they're working on is that it adds stability because the wind sails hang onto the ship like an outrigger.
okay.
And when the ship is entering the harbor, this wind sails peels away. It's on its own little boat. I got about 3 shots here of how they put it on. This is little boat is approaching the ship. Next one, it's a little bit closer, and then it drops it down on board the ship, and it's an outrigger, and you can put 2 of these on here, one on each side.
Wow.
And this is just getting a little bit closer to it. The sail that they're mentioning here is in itself a innovation. It's called a Triactol Sail. And I haven't gotten into the physics of it, but they claim benefits. And you can see on the right the outrigger type arrangement. Now this was down in Massachusetts. This is not a full-scale model. This is something that Mass Maritime was playing with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how big the scale is, but the ship is a real training ship, a radio-controlled ship that the maritime guys learn on.
Okay.
You know, so this is down in Boston Harbor or something like that.
Okay.
So there's a lot of, I think I'm pretty much out of my pictures, but there's a lot of innovation in an old technology.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me because when you think about renewable power, it's very easy to think wind, solar, hydro, maybe biomass, and people don't think about the rest of that market. I mean, here what we're looking at is ships, and I don't normally think about renewable power on ships. It's not something that's part of my day.
But there on the screen,
Yep,
they were used
that's right.
for thousands of years.
And you were talking about the research and development that's going on into renewable power on ships. And where else is it going? I mean, one of the things that I come across is renewable chemicals. We have an entire chemical industry springing up that is entirely sustainable. Your mouse has
I
died?
don't know. I can't. Oh, I got a cursor. I got a
okay.
cursor. I wanted to bring you up here.
We have an entire industry of renewable chemicals, which is based
Supplanting petroleum.
on supplanting petroleum, and
almost any plastic you can use today
Yep.
can be made this way.
Yep. And there was a company that recently I was reading about that is making polystyrene, polypropylene, polyethylene, and so forth from methane, which came from biodigesters. Mm-hmm. So you're taking food waste, human waste, mm-hmm. animal waste, throwing it into a big pot. Out comes methane. You make that into polypropylene, for example, and
mm-hmm.
you know,
mm-hmm.
it's kind of amazing the stuff that's happening. And again, this is something that's is going to be hitting the fossil fuel industry. They're starting to get competition from people who are making substitutes for fossil fuels from carbon dioxide, among other mm-hmm. things. And it's really, really interesting to see how that is all developing.
Well, I've probably said it here, but if I haven't, I'll say it again. There's some very, very smart people out there working independently on new stuff, just hoping, you know, that their concept, their idea is going to work, and some of them will.
Some of them will.
And some of them are going to revolutionize things.
That's right. And we're still on the upward curve of invention and discovery.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the inventions and discoveries are still happening at a greater rate every year, which means that if you think about the United States, for example, and what it's like now as opposed to what it was like 50 years ago. 50 years ago, what year was that? That was 1964.
Too fast for me.
Okay. Let's just say it's 1964.
64 sounds good, yep.
Compare today with 64, and what are the differences? You know, well, in a lot of respects, the cars that you see on the road are pretty much the same.
They look different, but they're basically the same thing.
Different style.
Yeah.
But when you start really paying attention, you realize that the cars that we have today, I had an uncle who had a new car in about 1962 that got 3 miles to a gallon of gas.
3?
3. It was very powerful, though. It had a 160 horsepower engine. You know, I mean, people in those days regarded a lot of things as throwaways. But computers.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the first computer I worked with, which was 1966, had 10 kilowatts, 10 kilobytes of memory. It had no disk drive. Mm-hmm. It had a keyboard where you could key in data that would be put onto punch cards.
Punch cards, right? Yeah.
It had no tape drives. It had
and that was
no
the next thing
drive.
was the tape drive. That was a big improvement.
Big improvement. Well, while I was at that school, they actually got a disk drive. It was
mm-hmm.
a very special sort of thing. And the memory cost $1 a bit. So that thumb drive you put in there would have cost 16 billion times 8. You know, we're talking about over $100 billion worth of memory in a thumb drive.
And it would have been the size of this building.
Oh, that much memory? I don't think there was that much memory on Earth. in those days.
No. But the memory that was available for computers in those days was building size.
Yeah, the computer was building size.
Yeah.
It was put into a building that had been a faculty apartment.
Okay.
And it was 16 kilobytes. It had no ability to put anything into it aside from
16K.
16K. It cost $1.5 million. They bought it used.
Wow.
It had, as I said, it had punch cards going in. It did have a printer, but it had no monitor. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. And it would run Fortran, I think. But you know, that's basically what it was all about. The thing needed 3 air conditioners to cool it. Mm-hmm. And today it would be regarded as laughably small in terms of its ability. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think about what is today and what was then in computers, and you realize that we went through a revolution that started in the late 1970s in terms of PCs.
Yeah.
I got my first PC in 1981. It was not a IBM PC. It was a Radio Shack Model 3, and it had 16K of RAM. It was basically the same machine that I had worked on 15 years earlier in terms of its capacity, but instead of costing $1.5 million used, it cost $1,000 new. That's where we're going in the future. We're going through that kind of change. And since there's so much effort being put into renewable power, we can bet that there's going to be changes analogous to that in the power industry.
I think it's inevitable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's called progress.
So how are we going to make power 50 years from now?
Well, we probably will do it in such a way that we don't have to pay for fuel.
Well, I think you're probably right. You know, we're at a point where there are certain things. In those days, you could buy a slide rule. I'm talking about 1964.
Oh,
you
yeah.
could buy a slide rule. You could, you know, people did calculations in math classes using pencils and paper. Mm-hmm. In those days, that's how things were done. The slide rule has completely disappeared.
Pretty much.
I don't think, I have been told that there is one slide rule manufacturer still existing in the United States. And they make these things to custom order for special purposes. Mm-hmm. You know, which might include such things as increasing or reducing the sizes of photographs and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So that you have tables on there that show you what the dimensions will be. We're in a position where I think we're going to have no fuel, or we're going to have fuel that's 100% renewable fairly quickly, well before 50 years from now.
I totally agree with you. I mean, it's moving in that direction. It's moving fairly rapidly.
Yeah, it is. Very much.
You know, it's kind of ironic. The petroleum is just a collection of carbon atoms in a long chain, a whole bunch of hydrogen attached to it, in
Yes.
various arrangements.
Probably looks a little bit like a caterpillar.
Yeah, I could see that. And in order to make plastics out of it, they reduce this stuff down. It's called cracking it.
Yeah.
They crack the petroleum, and basically they're reducing it to its basic carbon and hydrogen molecules. And then they reassemble them into plastics or fuels as they prefer.
Right.
I've always been told, and it's changed over the years, but classic gasoline was normal hexane and isooctane. Sounds like weird stuff. Hexane is 6 carbon atoms, hex. Mm-hmm. Octane is 8 carbon atoms. And isooctane was the same azo, but just twisted around a little bit. Mm-hmm. With the new technology that you're just mentioning, they're taking carbon dioxide and hydrogen, using a catalyst, coming up with basically
Methane.
Yep. And they're putting that together, almost the opposite of what the petroleum did. You broke it down, and then you're adding it up again, building it up in a custom way.
Right.
And here, You're building up a basic molecule and then building it up in a custom way. And basically the second part of that chain is identical.
Yeah, but the new stuff that they're making is very much superior to what they used to make or what they currently make in the refineries.
Well, there's less junk involved.
There's less junk
that
involved.
They got to get out of there.
Yeah, they don't have sulfur in it.
Those big long caterpillars, some of them had funky legs.
Well, they don't have sulfur, and they don't have
exactly
a number of other things in there.
That's in the oil.
Cause a lot of trouble. You know, I read something today, by the way, concerning sulfur. There was a power plant that's being converted in, I think, Illinois, and they were talking about people will no longer see the smoke come out of the plant, which was described as being yellow and blue. And the guy said the reason why it had yellow in it was because of the sulfur that was being emitted by the power plant. And they emitted something like 18,000 pounds of sulfur per year.
If it was yellow, it was organic sulfur or metallic sulfur.
Yeah.
Or elemental sulfur.
Elemental sulfur.
Yeah, tiny particles.
But you know, it kind of blew my mind to think that we're still emitting this stuff. Why? Why are we doing that? And what they're switching to is natural gas. But natural gas is identical in most respects, and it can be made identical to what comes out of a biodigester,
yeah,
which is what the farmers are producing on their farms.
Well, natural gas is essentially methane.
Yes. Yeah.
They'll have a little bit of extra junk in there.
And you know, the old story, I used to work in the chemical industry, but I was not in organic chemicals. I was in pharmaceuticals at one time, but I was not in organic chemistry, and so I wasn't making hexane, you know. But one of the things that happened as we were working, I was in the chemical industry when we had the gas crisis in 1973, and I was surprised to discover that we were losing feedstock. We could not, for example, buy acetic acid. Now, acetic acid smells like vinegar.
It is vinegar.
Basically, yes, that it is vinegar. And I had always thought that the acetic acid that we got came from the fermentation of something, sugar, corn syrup, something, into ethanol.
Like bad wine.
Yeah, into ethanol, and then further bacterial work would produce acetic acid, which could then be
well, it does work, but you're going to tell me something different.
They got the acetic acid from oil.
From oil.
It came from the oil fields.
Okay.
And when the gas crisis came, they stopped making acetic acid in the United States from oil because they needed the oil more than they needed the acetic acid.
Yeah.
So we were unable to fill, you know, an order for silver acetate or something like that, which silver acetate goes for a good amount of money. But you got to have the acetic acid to make it.
Yeah.
And
sounds like a photographic thing, silver acetate.
Well, anything that's silver, you can bet it's going to have something to do with some sort of photographic, because the silver does funny things. It does very funny things, and you know, among other things, turn black in the sun. But the point that I'm making is that we get a lot of things. We get plastics. We get acetic acid. I don't know that we don't get food out of oil. I'm sure that we get drugs out of oil. We get a lot of stuff out of oil.
I'm sure we get food out of oil. I just, off the top of my head, can't think of an example.
I can't think of an example either, but it would not surprise me to think that somebody is saying, oh, okay, you can make ethanol, you can make acetic acid. The guy in the next building over from where I was working was a guy I knew who was in the organic chemicals business, and he told me you can go from any molecule that has carbon in it to any other molecule that has carbon in it if you just know how. So you can go from aspirin to gasoline if you just want to do that. Now, it would make better sense to go from gasoline to aspirin because a bottle of aspirin costs much more than a gallon of gas or whatever. But the point is, if you've got an organic molecule which could be natural gas, but it could be food waste from a restaurant.
Absolutely.
You know, so you can take vegetable oil and you can turn it into diesel oil. And actually, that's something that a lot of people do.
Absolutely.
You know,
it's relatively easy to do.
Yeah, and you've probably done it.
I haven't done it, but I know people who have.
Okay.
And you could do something like that in your cellar.
Yes, and I've known, here in Brattleboro, I had a guy who lived next door to me who had a diesel car, and he powered the car on diesel oil that he made.
Yeah,
biodiesel. He made it by collecting free grease from restaurants and then reacting it. You know, he'd set up his little apparatus in the driveway.
A strong base, like a hydroxide.
Yeah. And he had a byproduct. I think the byproduct was glycerin.
Yes, it is, which they make soap out of.
You know, I mean, when you get right down to it, you've got a lot of stuff that you can make out of these things.
Well, you know, the bus company called the Mover.
Yes.
They have a little biodiesel factory in Wilmington.
Yes.
And the only reason they're not using it now, or at least stopped using it, was because they had new buses, and the manufacturers wouldn't honor the warranty if they didn't use Department of Transportation approved fuel.
Okay.
And they could have gotten their process Department of Transportation approved.
But you know what that tells me is that there's a facility in Wilmington that could be used.
Yes.
That somebody could say, I'm going to use this for my own purposes.
Yes.
I'm going to go into business making biodiesel that I'm going to sell to my
buddies. I might even know that guy. I know it's been discussed.
Yeah.
Where they're getting, what they're doing, I don't know. But I do know that the Mover is moving into new headquarters.
Okay.
And they're in an old lumber mill now, and they're building a new facility. They may have built it already, but in part of that process, they may very well divest themselves of this stuff. And I know some people up there that would be very interested in buying it.
Well, if they're going to divest themselves of it, I have no doubt that somebody's going to want to buy it.
No, someone's going to buy it.
Yeah. But we're seeing more and more of that stuff appearing around. More and more of it is on the market. And one of the things that I'm kind of guessing is that as we move into the future, we're going to see other things besides diesel being locally manufactured in the United States.
Well, it's happening as we speak in Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, they grow a lot of, they call it rapeseed, we call it canola.
Yep.
Over there.
Yep.
And they turn that into fuels.
Yep.
I mean, small little towns will have a little refinery where they're making basically kerosene.
Yes.
Kerosene, diesel oil, airplane fuels. For all intents and purposes, the same stuff.
All basically the same stuff. And as a matter of fact, Boeing has said that they're going to go into the manufacture of aviation fuel from...
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah. And they say they have facilities already set up for 600 million gallons a year.
And they have a supply chain where they can move it.
Yeah. Now, they're using a good deal more than what they've got set up to build, to make. But, you know, they're looking for U.S. DOT, I think it's DOT, might be Aviation Authority, approval on a blend of what is essentially biodiesel with their aviation fuel.
Well, for a company like that, they can afford to do that.
Yes.
From what I understand,
yes.
Jumping through the DOT hoops costs a lot of money.
Well, jumping through all the hoops, you know, the government puts things up, and jumping through whatever hoop they have is likely to cost a lot of money.
Well, that keeps the cats and dogs away.
I suppose it does. It also keeps people away who might benefit other people and who don't have the money to pay for all of that.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah. Somebody was pointing out to me, you know, if you were to, for example, discover that the spore of a small brown mushroom would cure cancer, and the mushroom has not been eaten because it's a small brown mushroom, and nobody in his right mind eats small
little
brown
mushrooms. Right.
If you could do that, you'd never be able to get it through the approval thing.
Not a chance.
As an individual. But if you could get it through the approval chain, you'd be hitting a lot of resistance from companies and other organizations that make a lot of money
Absolutely.
on cancer.
There's a lot more money involved in medicine in treating things than in curing them.
Right, and you know, it was interesting
It's
to
kind of sad,
me.
really.
It is. It was interesting to me to see the reaction that we think of the American Medical Association as being a wonderful organization, and in many respects, I think it is. But they came down very hard on chiropractic in Massachusetts, and basically maintained it as something that was illegal to do for a long period of time.
What time period are you talking about?
Well, this would have been prior to 1980. It would have
Okay.
been in the 1960s, I would guess. But there was a lot of information that came out from the American Medical Association saying that chiropractic was dangerous, saying that chiropractic didn't work, on and on and on. I was introduced to chiropractic by a pharmacist who said, "Those are your symptoms? You better go see a chiropractor." And it was like if I had gone to a regular physician with the symptoms that I had, which were somewhat bizarre. I had a plugged up nose on the left side of my nose. Right was okay, but the left side was plugged up. Swollen glands on the left, not on the right. I had a very sore throat on the left side, not on the right. I had headache on the left side, not on the right. And you know, you go through this list of symptoms, it sounded like I had an extremely bad cold, but only on the left side of my body. And the guy who was the pharmacist, who was a guy who had a doctorate in pharmacology, said to me, "Weren't you in an automobile accident 6 weeks ago?" He said, "Go to a chiropractor. I know a guy who will take you." And I went to the chiropractor, and he took an x-ray of me, and he said, "You know, you've got whiplash." And he put me on a table, and he treated me and charged me $17. This is a long time ago. And on the way home, my mouth suddenly filled with saliva as the glands on the left side of my mouth suddenly opened up. And by the time I was home, all of the symptoms were gone. Well, he had said, "I want to see you in 3 days." 3 days later, I woke up and all symptoms had returned, although they were nowhere near as bad. And I went, and while he was working me on the table, they all went away again. And since that time, I have periodically had problems that I had to go to a chiropractor for because I had had whiplash. Now, what he was doing was manipulating my vertebrae to put them back into the position that they were supposed to be
They're
in.
supposed to be.
And
They were probably impinging upon a nerve or a series of nerves.
a series of nerves, I would guess. But that was what the American Medical Association was fighting in Massachusetts. Why were they fighting it? Yeah, it's because the American Medical Association is a trade group, and they're looking out for their own. Often, usually, they're looking out for people, ordinary people. They're trying to get good medicine to good people. But every once in a while, being human, they at least this is my opinion, you know, they make a mistake on something, and when they do, they're wrong. What can you say? And now you can get chiropractic in Massachusetts. Well, we're in the energy business. That's what we're looking at today. And as it works in pharmaceuticals, as it works in medicine, as it works in a lot of industries, so it works in energy.
Well, you can see both here and in Europe,
Yeah.
the big energy companies are fighting all sorts of innovations.
Yes.
And they're supporting people who will come out and I'm against wind, I'm against solar.
That's
I
right.
just heard the latest one. Somebody was objecting to solar because of the glare from the windows.
Yeah. Well, actually, that is a problem at airports.
This wasn't an airport, though.
Well, they had a, and I would imagine that, you know, you set up a solar farm next to somebody's house when the sun is in the right position.
You might get some glare.
You might get some glare, and it might actually be very objectionable. So maybe the people who've put up the wind farm should donate a set of curtains. I don't know. But Manchester Airport has what I think was, or maybe even still is, the largest solar array in New Hampshire. But they had to readjust it because pilots flying over, all of those panels had been set up identically, and there was a patch in the sky.
I can see how that can happen.
Where you fly through it, and all of a sudden there's a really bright light coming up from the ground. So what they did was what they're doing is they're throwing them all slightly out of kilter to one another.
So that they don't all focus
So they don't
on
all
the same
focus
spot.
on the same spot. And that kind of thing can be a problem.
Well, I can see how it can be, but that's an isolated case.
It is.
And
well,
the article I was reading was just some person standing up at a town meeting objecting to somebody putting up solar field, which didn't even impinge on this person.
Yeah.
There's glare. There's going to be glare.
There's going to be glare. Well, there's going to be other things too. I read something where a person was objecting to PVs being put up in a desert in California because of the effect that it would have on the wildlife in the desert in California.
Yeah, I guess it would have some sort of an effect.
Well, it'll give the lizards a place to hide, I guess.
Huh?
It'll give the lizards a place to hide.
It might not. Yeah, it might be a beneficial effect.
It might be a beneficial effect. It might interfere with the ability of raptors to hunt in that area.
Yeah.
I don't know. But solar fields, I mean, they tend to be large, but they're not so large they go to the horizon. A bird that can't hunt in this 100 acres can hunt in the next 100 acres over.
Well, the solar fields depends on how they're arrayed, but if they're not laid flat on the ground, you can still use the ground.
Yes.
Cattle can graze under solar fields.
Yes. Another thing too
Matter of fact, right up here on Western Avenue, it's happening. It's goats.
Yes. I read that Kingdom Community Wind.
Yeah.
They just announced the results of the sound tests, and they had 6 different sites that they did sound tests over a period of more than 1,000 hours. It was continuous sound tests, and the sounds at those sites never got above 45 decibels.
Which is about what we're talking at right now.
It's pretty quiet. The thing, in general, we're talking about something that's about as loud as a library.
Yeah.
And those sites were all closer than any of the neighbors. So the neighbors were all getting reduced sounds from that. Or at least, hopefully, we're all, sometimes sounds travel in weird ways.
Yeah. But generally were lower than what was measured.
Yeah, and so they were talking about Kingdom Community Wind passing its test, which it has to do annually. It has to do this every year. They're going to be sending people up there to make sure that site is
not too
noisy.
Really.
Yeah,
it's part of the cost of doing business.
Well, another thing too is the software that they're using to control the wind turbines can be used to control the sound of the wind turbines.
Yeah.
You can say this particular atmospheric condition, which is one that occurs less than 1% of the time, is going to produce louder sounds. I forget what the condition is, but there was one that they were talking about, and it is less than 1% of the time, and it does make louder sounds. It might be variable wind, which causes the turbines to turn a lot. That might be, And
that's noisy.
That's noisy. But the thing that they said was, what you do is you just tell the wind turbines to shut off, which is not difficult to do, and so you lose 0.5% of your power output, but you cut your noise enormously, and these are all things that can be done. Well, how are we doing, Tom?
Time-wise?
Time-wise, do you want to? Are we gonna wrap up? I think we're gonna wrap up.
We can wrap up. Yeah, it's getting close to noon.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about my computer. I could not restore power to it.
Just one thought just came to my mind on the Searsburg operation. If you go to their website,
yes,
and you got to search for it, but you can find some photographs that they took over extreme periods of time, like over the course of a year, 4 seasons, on the wildlife.
Yes.
And anything you might expect to see in Vermont forests, you'll see walking around those turbines as if there's nothing there.
Did they get a catamount?
I don't think so.
Yeah, probably not.
Well, they might have, though. They got a lot. There wasn't anybody there. It was all automatic.
Yeah. If they got a catamount, my guess is that the Vermont wildlife people would say, please don't put that up.
Well, supposedly a catamount was seen in Wilmington by a sheriff's deputy.
I saw one myself once in New Jersey.
In New Jersey yet?
In New Jersey, yeah. And in fact, that particular cat was captured.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Huh.
That was a weird thing. I worked an evening shift, and I'd go home at 12:30. And if I was tired or stressed, I'd drive, you know, out in the countryside on the way home. And I was driving along near an area called the Great Swamp, and which is several miles across. And as I was driving, a cat jumped out in front of my car. And I thought I was going to total my car on that thing. It was huge. It was as big as a large deer.
Wow.
I figured it weighed 180 pounds.
Wow.
And, you know, it was
even for a cat about that's big.
Yeah. And this thing, you know, it had the classic very long tail. But it was, and the people in that town had been complaining about a lion. And I knew it. And I thought, there's the lion. And about 6 months later, after everybody I knew had told me that I was insane, the thing was captured because they heard that there was a local murder. They heard the murderer had holed up in the Great Swamp. They beat the Great Swamp looking for the murderer. And when they got to the middle of the swamp, they came to an island, which the newspaper said was 80 by 20 feet. This is not a big island. And on the island, completely surrounded by these people, were the murderer, the catamount, and a black bear. And they said, you've never seen a murderer so anxious to give himself up. But they took the black bear to Pennsylvania and let it go. And they said, this is clearly the last Appalachian cougar north of Florida, because they've been extinct north of Florida since 1900. And so they took the cat down to Florida and released it. But, you know, that was 35 miles from the Lincoln Tunnel. Yeah. We're talking about areas where, you know, and they did not take the last one out of the Northeast.
I'm sure they didn't, yeah. Well, I'm sure there's some floating around that.
They're funny animals. They're very shy.
Yeah.
They have huge territories. They're solitary. So in an area of 100 square miles, you might find one of them. But they're nocturnal.
Probably find two.
No, from what I read, they don't.
They're solitary.
They are absolutely solitary. So you might find a female with a couple of her kits, or you might find a male. But
they get together to party once in a while.
They do, apparently, yeah. And when one is found, the wildlife people say, "Oh, I wonder how that got here." They found one in, I think it was Massachusetts. They found a female with a couple of her young, and they said, well, clearly this cat must have jumped on a freight car or something with doors open, and they got closed, and it wound up being in Massachusetts before.
Could have happened.
Right.
Well, I think I saw a lynx one time, which I shouldn't have seen. It was over in the Adirondacks. And the only way I can describe it is it was about the size and shape of a boxer dog, but it was a cat.
Did it have huge feet or little feet?
No, I wasn't close enough to see it.
Because a bobcat and a lynx look identical almost, except the lynx looks comparing a bobcat to a lynx is kind of like comparing a pickup truck to a monster truck. The lynx looks like the bobcat, but it has gigantic feet.
Well, it could have been a large bobcat.
Yeah,
I couldn't deny that.
Yeah.
But
I had a bobcat.
It was bigger than my impression of bobcats.
I had a bobcat walk by my window. I was standing in my house in New Hampshire, and I was in the living room, and I looked out the window, and a bobcat walked by. I don't think it was more than 10 feet from me. And that was an impressive sight.
I bet.
It was. I mean, looking at that cat was not like looking at a lion or a tiger in a zoo. That cat looked tough. And unfortunately, it killed a couple of our house cats.
Oh, unfortunately, yeah. Wow.
Well, it wanted some dinner.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway.
Well, let's wrap up here.
Have a nice day, people.
I got to figure out how to take this.
Come back and join us again.
This thing out of here.
And we're between now and next week when we film this. record this, we will figure out how to take the thumb drive out of the computer.